talk about how you can build a successful open source framework. Before I get into that, just want to talk a little bit about myself and my background. I'm a developer and co-founder of a software company in Madison, Wisconsin called Drifty. We started out building simple drag and drop developer tools. So you may have heard of our other products, Codica for building Jigger mobile apps, and Jetstrap for building drag and drop Twitter Bootstrap pages. So we started building these simple developer tools, but last year we had this realization that what was actually lacking was better tools for building mobile apps with web technologies. So we built Ionic, which I'm going to talk about today. And yeah, so I'd love to have you follow me on Twitter, stay in touch after the presentation, or just chat afterwards. First of all, I just want to define what a framework is before I get into this. A framework is basically a set of pre-written tools and code that you can use to build an application without having to worry about reinventing the wheel all the time. So for example, you're building a web app, you'll use Django or Rails, you'll get all the form validation, you'll get form processing, database stuff, URL routing, stuff that would be a complete waste of time to write on your own every time you build an app. On the front end, you'll use JavaScript, a JavaScript framework like Angular or Ember that gives you AJAX requests really easily, data binding, helps you structure your application, so you don't have to worry about writing all that stuff from scratch all the time. So that's the academic definition of what a framework is in the software world. But I think a better definition is a framework is just my way of doing things. Like it's not your way, it's not your way, it's not your way, it's my way. It's this egotistical manifestation of the fact that me, the metaphorical developer, I think I'm a better developer than you. I think I can design something better than you. I know the domain better than you do. So we see all these people building frameworks because they all think they can do something better than everyone else. So frameworks are this egotistical desire to put your code and put it into someone else's code and make them use your stuff to build their stuff. So that's a very cynical way of looking at a framework, but it's kind of true. But the way, the nicer way to look at it is software engineering is becoming like an art form. And I don't just mean like the user experience and the design layer, but the actual interfaces and the APIs are like little works of art. So as engineers, there are very few problems that we solve that are like kind of rigorous mathematical proofs. It's very open-ended. So going back to the web app example, like Rails and Django have two different ways of doing things. They kind of achieve the same goal, but you'll buy into one's set of values and their API design, and then you build the other. So software engineering is this artistical thing. So we see a lot of frameworks because a lot of people have different ideas of how software should work for the developer. So it's a very creative process. And on top of that, there's still a ton of uncharted territory. So every technological advancement, like the iPhone coming out and letting developers build apps for it, unlocked this huge portion of this map that needed to be discovered. We needed tools for developers to build iPhone apps. We needed frameworks and skill sets to develop so that we could build these. So we're constantly finding ourselves in uncharted territory. We need to create tools, we need to use tools that exist in order for us to get our job done. So that's what a framework is. That's why we see so many of them. That's why we will continue to see many of them. There's thousands of them out there. So I want to talk about the framework that we built. So our framework is called Ionic. It's an open source HTML5 developer framework. You would use it if you want to build a quality mobile app that feels native but using only web technologies. So we built this thing because we thought the web was ready on mobile, but needed tools to let developers build the same kinds of apps that they could build with the iOS and Android SDKs, but using only web technologies and things like AngularJS. So we built a framework, a set of UI elements, a set of JavaScript libraries, CSS, built a website, documentation, tutorials, we built a brand, we built a company, all these things just to let our framework have life. So this is a screenshot of the Github page. Since we launched Ionic at the end of November 2013, our project has over 5,000 stars on GitHub. There's over 60 contributors from around the world, and every day over 300 new Ionic apps are created. So people are using our framework to build their applications on top of it, which is really, really awesome, and we're really happy and proud that that happened. So I think Ionic is becoming a successful open source framework. So I want to talk a little bit about how we pull this off and how you can pull it off too with your own projects. So First of all, I think the most important thing, kind of the prerequisite to building a framework in general, is you kind of need to be a little stupid. And not just stupid, but you need to be crazy. Like, you need to actually believe that you can pull this off and want to do it. Frameworks are becoming so intense that, like, the thought of building something like Rails should be, like, incredibly daunting. And if it's daunting to you, that's probably a sign that you're not crazy enough. Because if you're going to build your own, it needs to be like, oh, that's easy, I can make Rails like tomorrow. Like, you need to have that mindset, because building a framework is so much work. And I think if we knew how much work it would be going into it, we maybe wouldn't have done it. So this is like, when we started building this, we looked at all the other frameworks. We had some serious competition. And we thought about this for a while. Like, I don't know if this makes sense, it's so much work. Like, these projects have more contributors, all this stuff. And we realized at the end of the day that we could overcome that. And so you need to be a little crazy. So on top of that, you need to be an egomaniac. Because you need to look at everything that's out there and know that you could do a better job. So, like, if you're going to build a better mobile framework like us, we looked at everything out there and we said, we could design this better, we could make it faster, we could use better technologies. And we actually believed that. And we started telling people that that's what we were going to do. So we had to have an ego about why we were doing it, otherwise no one would care. So
don't be shy about which ones you thought was better.
I'll save some of the names, but we looked at some of the popular ones and we just didn't think they were going to be able to take us into the future. So we had to be have an ego about it. And like, this doesn't mean be a dick or whatever, but just believe in yourself and know that you can do a better job. Otherwise, you're not going to put in the work to actually pull it off. So, assuming you're crazy enough, assuming you believe in yourself enough, you need to start building. So, building a framework, building software for other people to use is a really big responsibility. And you can kind of get in a trap where you just plan forever, like, oh, I need to build this like perfect architecture, let's use some UML diagrams. Like, that's a waste of time. Like, until you start building something, you don't know how it actually feels in practice. So what kind of sparked Ionic was, I was playing with the HipChat app on my iPhone, and I was like using the side menu, and I was just like thinking like, you know, we couldn't really do this with Codica using jQuery mobile. Like, it just doesn't have the gestures, it doesn't like feel fast enough. So I went and see if I could build like a JavaScript demo using gestures, using CSS3 animations and some of the like CSS3 transforms, and built this like demo that felt really, really native. And we showed it to everyone, and like that was kind of the start of why we built the project. So if you're going to build a framework, start building right away. Start telling people why it's better. Start getting people on board. It's very important. So why building this thing? Building an audience is really, really crucial. So with Ionic, we had a landing page up almost before we had any code written. So that's kind of like, I think that's actually a great plan for any startup, any product. Like, put up a landing page, get email addresses like on day one, and start like talking to people who sign up on the list. So what we did is we had people sign up and we asked them like, what are you using right now? Like, oh, I'm using jQuery mobile or Essential or whatever. And then we asked them like, okay, what would be better? What would make you switch? And we found out all these things that would actually make them switch, and it validated what we were doing. It made us more excited about it and got us through the next like 4 months of just like heads down coding. So the other part of this is you see so many projects, they're just pet projects, but people put a lot of energy into them. And it's almost like a tragedy of how much work goes wasted in the open source world because no one ever hears about it. Or no one ever uses it and improves it. Because that first release, it's always going to suck. But the people behind it, if they have help and they have passion, like passionate community, they can really turn it into something amazing. So don't let your project falter because no one knows about it. Start building an audience. Along the same line, like, you need to be opinionated. So I've talked a little bit about that, but we had a few strong opinions when we started this. One of them was that jQuery wasn't fast enough and we weren't going to use jQuery. So this was something that pissed people off because jQuery is great, don't get me wrong, but there was this growing movement of people who think that jQuery won't let you build fast mobile apps. And I think they're more right than they're wrong. So we had this strong opinion about how Ionic uses no jQuery. And that pissed some people off, but it made other people kind of get on board and say, yeah, that's great. jQuery, it's not future-proof anymore. Like, so that was one opinion we had. The other one we had was we were going to base Ionic on AngularJS. which wasn't the case when we started. So we're building basically a CSS framework with JavaScript library to make like interactive user interface. You could use it with Backbone, Meteor, Ember, Angular, but we realized that if we didn't pick one of them, if we didn't get a single community excited, no one would care about it. So we took the strong opinion that we think AngularJS is the best way to build applications with JavaScript, period. And we've been really, really passionate about that. And it's made, like I said, it's made some people angry, but it's also made the Angular community get on board, and we have a lot more supporters because of that. And it's a good thing we did that because the thought of supporting every framework under the sun makes me like get really scared. Because just doing Angular was enough work. So be opinionated, tell people why you're opinionated. One last little opinion that we have that I love getting into fights about with people is I think building native apps is stupid. I think it's idiotic, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. It just doesn't make sense in the future. I think more people will be building mobile applications with web technologies. I think developers want to, but there weren't tools there for them. So that's an opinion that not everyone agrees with, and you find these communities where that opinion has more strength than others, and that helps us guide like our marketing efforts. It helps us guide like sales in the future, but it gets people to know about us and what we're doing. So, okay, so as you're building this thing, first of all, it has to be open source. Like the world just does not need proprietary software anymore. Like from like a library standpoint, like what happened in mobile development on the web is you had this like 2 or 3 year gap where it was only proprietary. Like yeah, they used like open source as like a sales tactic, but it wasn't actually open source. But open source comes in and destroys them. So make sure your framework is totally open source, like permissive license. But you have to balance being open source with being closed. So what happened with us was we released our GitHub repo as like a pre-alpha just to get some feedback from people. And what ended up happening was this like broken, like totally not ready version of the project got submitted to Hacker News, which was awesome, don't get me wrong, like, but it was like a really bad first impression. We kind of lost control of the launch. Along those same lines, we wanted to impress the AngularJS team. So we're kind of waiting before we release this to show them, and someone submitted like this broken version to the Angular like Google Plus page on a Friday afternoon. It was broken, it was a bad first impression, like we had to spend like Friday night working on it. So that's not really a bad thing in hindsight, like it worked out. But the point is that the open source community will take your project and run with it, which is awesome, but just be aware that you'll lose control if you need to have control over a certain launch. So that's balancing that. Building a community for an open source project is probably the most important thing you can do. So I was actually just at a open source summit a few weeks ago, and there was this contrast between companies that just made something open source and released it to ones that actually fostered a community. They participated as if they were just another community member. Those projects always succeeded, and the other ones failed. You can't just open source something and release it and say, hey, this is framework, like it's open source, they can use it. Because people won't use it. Like they need to have a community, they need to have some energy behind it. So we started doing this with a forum. The forum is really, really great for this. Released a forum, got people on board, got people communicating. We helped them out, like we were very manual at first, like helping them with their own code sometimes. But this was important to help kind of like solidify us as authentic people in the community. And now the community is starting to grow. But this is so much work, and we're just getting started here. A lot of work. So building a community is important for your project to succeed. But you need to make sure that you also don't let the community kind of destroy you. Because people will do this. It happens in every open source community. There's always some bad apples. Those people will submit issues that are actually their own code that has nothing to do with the project. They'll like scream at you, and then you find out like 20 like comments later that it was just like, oh, my bad. Like that happens all the time. So it's important to make sure that you're not letting the community kind of take too much of your time, because they're better off if you work on the framework, if you work on your code. So we've had to really be better about this. At first we were very open, we spent a lot of time hand-holding, but now we're trying to replace that manual support with good documentation, good tutorials, so that we don't get bogged down in these tasks, and we don't get kind of, I don't want to say taken advantage of, but we don't let bad apples kind of ruin the project for everyone. So practicing tough love is really important. The plus side of this is if you're stern with people and you like push for your vision, people really respect it. And it's almost way better than if you just kind of didn't do that. So we definitely treat Ionic as a benevolent dictatorship. And I think if you want to build a successful project, it has to be that. I think committees can take popular open source projects and maintain them, but they will not innovate with them. So practice tough love, be a benevolent dictator. So just a few more slides before I'm done. Automation is really, really important. So assume your project's getting off the ground, people are using it, they're building it. Automation is the most important thing to do at that point. So we had, for example, a Travis CI process that takes every commit to GitHub, runs our test suites, updates the CDN with new nightly releases, updates the website when we ship a full release, generates our documentation, sometimes tweets for us. That sounds like really like a lot of stuff, but having to do that manually for every release is so much work. It was taking us away from working on the code and making us just kind of like make a bunch of mistakes and having to edit a lot of places. So we invested several weeks just automating everything. So this is really, really important. So most of all, the most important thing for a successful open source project is that there's a vision behind it. Like, all these things add up to a vision of what you're building and where you're going. So for us, we think the web and web technologies are the best way to build mobile apps. Yes, it's early, but we are going to be leading that charge to make everyone building mobile apps with web technologies. So that's our vision. And so we veto things that don't make sense to that vision. We veto things that kind of don't believe in open web standards as the ultimate winner. This is hard to do. Like sometimes people get upset and there's competing things that have different visions. And so people buy into those. And that's just going to happen. And it's our goal to kind of prove that we're going to be right over time. So have a vision for your framework. Be loud about it. Be opinionated about it. Have aggressive marketing copy on your landing page. Get people excited. Piss people off. But be patient. It takes a while. And go make some awesome frameworks. Thank you.